So just over a year ago, the Lord and Saviour of rugby values, Sir William Blackledge Beaumont, Knight Grand Cross,
Sir William Blackledge Beaumont,
Knight Grand Cross of the most excellent British Empire.
Come on, man. You're on about Deputy Lieutenant Sir William Blackledge Beaumont, Knight Grand Cross of the most excellent order of the Great British Empire.
Yes,
which is his real name.
That's his full name. He was sent off to the great value haven in the sky to sit on it in his special armchair and watch reruns of Rugby Special from 1991.
You make it sound like he's dead. He will never die.
No.
He will just carry on.
There is a way for this video to age very badly, very quickly. So, just over a year ago, right, he was sent off to Pastor to go and sit in a field and think about how wonderful it is all these players come and shake hands at the end of the game and eat infinite raspberry ripple and, enjoy his Yorkshire puddings and go to the Toby Carvery every Sunday and go, yes, I wonder if there's a Premiership game on today.
Good old Sir Bill. I'm worried about him because he's not tweeted for about a year now, so I've not had a chance to talk to him.
Yeah. We did see him in Dublin, though, for that Lions game.
He was walking so slowly.
So he left his position as the chief kingpin of World Rugby just over a year ago, right? The Bill Beaumont era, broadly, I think, to sum it up, right, in terms of his 8 years in charge of World Rugby, was all about the values of the game, right? His approach was very much, how do we get across that rugby is a special thing played by special gentlemen and now special ladies, which Bill was always very much like, yes, women play rugby now.
It's great to see them play together.
Yes. Wow, we truly do, like you're in a sandpit when you're 6.
Yeah.
And that's his whole approach, right? It was like, what we need to do is find more ways to play together and really more opportunities to shake hands at the end of games. It was like the Bill Beaumont approach, right?
Yes, incredibly
he was replaced
harmless.
by Brett Robinson of Australia. So, Brett Robinson, a figure, I think, look, he was never a host on A Question of Sport. So people know less about Brett Robinson than they do Bill Beaumont, right? However, I think this week we've got the first real statement of the Brett Robinson era, about a year on from him taking over, in terms of what his period in charge of World Rugby is going to be like and what they're wanting to do.
Yeah.
So, a bit of a change in, in tone, but I didn't know this about Brett Robinson until I started looking this up. So World Rugby have published a bunch of new guidelines for player safety and player welfare and player load very specifically. So Brett Robinson won 16 caps for the Wallabies. He's not John Eales, but was like a solid player for them, over the amateur era. Then went off, trained as a medical doctor, played in the Australian varsity game and everything, is a medical doctor, and has spent the last few years, alongside his commitment to Rugby Australia, researching concussion at the University of Queensland.
Okay.
So, he is now in charge of World Rugby. Mm-hmm. And I think we got a real statement in terms of the first real big act of his era that wasn't already in motion is this. And for me, it lays out the way World Rugby is looking at what I think they're going to be doing over the next few years, which is very much focused on player safety.
Can I just say, first and foremost, I kind of like where this is going, somebody who's studied concussion, all of this. Also, before we get into this, we've sat down to record this. I have no idea what we're about to talk about. So you're about to tell me a load of stuff. I don't know what we're about to talk about, but I like where this is going. So, in order to take part in the WXV competition and the World Nations League competition that's supposedly starting next year, and therefore to be signed up to international fixtures, if you are within the kind of essentially tier 1 and the top end of tier 2, in order to take part in these competitions, to get these games, you have to agree to a new set of principles that World Rugby put in place, right? So, therefore, all major nations have either agreed to this or are in the process of signing this document over the next few weeks. Will sign it or they will be excluded from the World League. So, they're all going to sign it, right? Yeah. Every nation is going to agree to this. So, it's in the process. So, it lays out guidelines on what a player can and can't do throughout a season. And the idea is they want to, based on research, based on the sort of stuff that Robinson himself was looking at, but as well as they've got a whole panel of scientists and experts they put out that have been consulted over this, as well as independent players and doctors within teams. They are going to put a hard limit on, right? Or you're going to have two options essentially, but a hard limit of 30 games a season that a player can play over the full year, right? Which is any professional player?
Any professional player within any nation signed up to the World League or WXV. So 30 games per season, that is at club and country level. The nation that So, England has to oversee the Premiership and make sure this is kept to within the Premiership, right? Likewise, cross-border competitions, it will be on that nation to monitor the clubs within their own competition, right?
Okay.
So 30 games per season as a maximum.
What about players who play overseas?
Or, this is something we'll get onto as well.
Okay.
So, they can play a maximum, you can sign up to one or the other, either 30 games maximum per season, or no more than 6 consecutive games.
Okay.
So 6 per week. You'll count having played a game. If you play more
that
than,
makes sense.
Yes.
Gives the body a rest after, because 6 games of rugby in consecutive weeks, like it does eventually take its toll.
Absolutely. Sure. So you've got to agree to one or the other minimum. Ideally, they want both to be taking place.
Sure.
You'll count as having played a game, or it being a game week, which is how they refer to it as, like, a game that week. If any day, Monday to Sunday that week, you have played more than 1 minute of a competitive fixture.
Yeah.
So if you play 30 seconds and then the full-time whistle goes, then you're fine, you don't count.
Sure.
Or if you don't go off the bench, that doesn't count.
Yeah.
I think it's the way they're looking at it, right? So, like, if you're included in the matchday squad but you don't play, you can play the following week. That's fine. So there must also be at least 5 weeks off per season from playing, from a match week, from a game week, right? However, the most interesting part of this, beyond this, is that they must have at least 12 weeks of non-contact per year.
Okay. So, interesting. In terms of training. Right, okay.
So no contract training per...
for 12 weeks.
For 12 weeks. It doesn't have to be consecutive.
Yeah.
But over the week, right? And clubs and nations must be able to prove that this took place.
Okay.
And this will be checked up on.
And so this is per player, but presumably coaches will go, well, we have to adhere to this. Yeah. We will give our whole squad a week of non-contact training at this moment. Well, that is great news for Pat Lam, isn't it?
Yeah.
With his 1,000 touches a week that he's trying to implement into his training.
And we go back to, right, this will have tactical knock-ons. You look at Quins winning the league. Big part of that, a few years back, but in 2021, was that they drastically reduced the amount of contact they were doing in training.
Yeah.
And it meant they were fresher going into games. Other teams were trying to get them to, like, physically ready, like, be dominant, be aggressive, be everything. Quins went, we're reducing the training. They reduced it by, I think, 2/3 or something absurd, like 50% off or something. And it came down drastically, and they were fresher and able to play games with more energy, and they lasted longer. They lasted the 80th minute, right? This will have a knock-on effect here. I think it will change the way which teams are...
To be honest, like, again, from a spectator's point of view, I quite like that because it will encourage teams to look at... Like, 12 weeks is a lot, you know? And... Granted, you can implement that to pre-season, which is a big
bunch
part
of that will be pre-season and off-season, right?
Where you can just do game-based fitness long before you have to make a tackle.
So,
but regardless, it encourages skills that are attacking-based rather than just collision-based. And that's quite good. And also, like, again, it takes away time from the defence a little bit, from the tackle area and from the breakdown area. And again, like, as a spectator, and I know that it's marginal in terms of, like, what a rugby team does in a whole year. You know, this is 12 weeks, you know. But... still, I quite like that, you know. It puts a little bit more emphasis on the attack. And, like, certainly, like, with women's teams, because, like, women's rugby is much more attacking-based than men's rugby is, you know? And so that really, like, lends itself to, like, how that game likes to be played.
Yeah. So we mentioned the off-season. I'll jump on this point there that is hidden away in there. Like, they released 12 pages of documentation detailing this in depth. This is squirreled away in there. But players must have a 5-week off-season, essentially.
Okay. And that's not included in the non-contact section?
So that can overlap, right? So
it could just be 7 weeks
almost certainly it'll be 7 weeks during the season and 5 weeks during that.
Sure.
During this time, they are allowed to be given essentially during this period, right, they can be set a schedule of... you must be keeping up to this level. You must do this much weight training, this much fitness training. You must go for a jog around your park. You must take your dog out for a walk. Whatever it is, right? That can be set, but it must be allowed to be done on the player's own time, between seasons, or at least like given these weeks off between campaigns. So it could be you give a player like a week off after they come back from the Autumn Internationals, say. And you give them then a whole week off of like, I forget what the phrase they use is, but. Of like...
Where it's like doing personal training and stuff. Yeah.
Leave is the way they refer to it.
Yeah. I've got mates who either play or have played professionally,
Yeah.
who I know what their weeks off look like, and they are pretty damn brutal.
Yeah.
Where it is like they are still doing, like Malcolm runs on a Tuesday night, except they're doing it at the local club rather than their professional team.
But the reason they say here, right, is the mental load.
Yeah.
And they want to make sure that players would have some time to themselves.
That's good.
And instead of coming in, 9 a.m. on a Monday, leaving at 4 p.m., and having been flat out during that period, they go, well, do fitness on your own time. Make sure you've got the time to mentally unload and mentally prepare for
I like that.
Which I think is really positive. So the other thing is after international blocks, right? And we just alluded to that. If you come back from, say, an Autumn Internationals or a Six Nations or a Rugby Championship, Rugby Championship is a whole issue in here because that season just runs on forever and it's a bit weird, especially South Africa. That's something to touch on in a minute. There is essentially a forced stand-down period. So you'll have to have at least 1 week off on this kind of leave where you're out of it, you're not involved, you don't play a game minute. You can then come back in and then get involved the week after. If you're coming back from a World Cup specifically, and this will include women's teams coming back from the World Cup now that's just finished days ago, you are forced 1 mandatory week off where you're not in training.
Okay.
You can, again, fitness training, whatever, is allowed to be set by the coach, but you're not to be in training. And then 1 week non-contact training afterwards, if you come back in your club environment.
That feels reasonable, I think. Yeah. Especially, to be honest, especially like at men's level, when you look at the level of impact that is going on in international rugby. And I think other than kind of a jump up from like amateur to professional, it's possibly the biggest jump in terms of sheer physicality. Not that I would know personally, but you know what I mean.
In terms
you can tell
by watching, right?
Yeah, in terms of like collision speed and like velocity and all of that between men's club rugby and men's international rugby, the jump is insane. Yeah. And I think allowing players a chance to mentally unload, as you say, and physically to just look after their bodies and just go for a jog on a Tuesday night instead of clattering into people again.
Smashed by even Etzebeth.
And also like clubs and internationals, their calendars won't sync up. You think about, let's say there's an autumn international, let's say we support Wales, right? Wales have played South Africa on the Sunday, right? And then a player goes back to Ospreys, let's say. Ospreys have Munster on the weekend, or they've got the Bulls on the weekend. They've got the most physical team in the league on the weekend. So they go, right, Monday we've got day off, Tuesday we're going to have a high impact session, and then we're going to chill out the rest of the week. And we want you on the bench because you're one of our best players, you're a Wales international, we want you to play. Like the calendars aren't kind like that, they don't sync up. So instead making that mandatory, so they've got to have the week off, then the week of non-contact, that's brilliant. And it stops somebody from coming back from little niggles and injuries too soon. Because when you've played against South Africa on the Sunday, let's say, in this hypothetical, you will have bruises. You will have injuries. Like, I don't think anybody can get through a game against the most physical international team without little knocks here and there. And they take longer than 24 hours to heal up in a lot of cases. So I think that's really sensible.
This is now uniform for everyone.
Yeah.
Nations that have their own guidance in place are allowed to lean on them. So Ireland, for instance, have a maximum number of games that Ireland international, Ireland squad players are playing, the men. In that case, they're allowed to continue on with that, right, and change their own guidelines so long as they're roughly in line with these.
Sure.
But these are maximums put in place, right? So you're not allowed to exceed that 30 games per season or 6 consecutive games. They do have, in the fine print, you are allowed to, in exceptional circumstances, which they list as semis and finals, basically, you're allowed to apply for that to be altered.
Okay.
However, in that case, it would be they need to provide, the coach themselves and the club or nation need to provide a plan for how they will make up for it, right? So if a player, say, has played 4 games in a row, they're then playing semi-final next 2 weeks, they're allowed to play them there and exceed that 6-game limit or play a 31st game of the season, providing they put a plan in place to say, we're giving them an extra week off here, or we're going to rest them for 5 weeks afterwards or whatever.
Again, that's sensible, isn't it?
That's fine. It means that you're not in a situation, right, where someone accidentally exceeds that limit over the course of the season because they're not expecting to go far, then their best player can't play in the final.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's reasonable.
Yeah.
And
so
clubs can communicate to their unions about this.
There's a little bit of question mark, right? Because it very much all covers players who play for a nation and play in that nation as well.
Yeah.
All of that is very clear. Once you get into other selections, and there's a few of them where they say, right, so like, if a player comes back from national duty, they still need to be rested. However, there are not a lot of the same things in place, same guidelines in place necessarily for, say, Tier 2 players. Right?
Yeah.
So you think about, I don't know, man, like Ian Pryor playing for Zimbabwe, right, is outside those gaps. He's playing professionally. He wouldn't necessarily have to be rested after international blocks, so he wouldn't be the same. There's some question marks there. There's also potentially, is this more licensed to flog South Sea Island players, potentially, right?
Yeah.
If they're included differently, if they're separate within this. I don't know, because it very much feels like all of this is very clear. All the guidance is very clear on players from your own nation. I think it's great. There's some question marks around players from other nations and how they slot in. I imagine they'll probably try and cover them in the same way and just go, while you're playing in that nation, you're covered as a player from that nation legally for this standpoint.
Yeah. But another one that I think there's a bit of a question mark over is when you've got like fringe players, let's say in the Premiership, right, often get sent down the dual registered with like the Championship, for instance, and you find the same, like, you know, you look at like All Ireland League, you know, a lot of those will be on the fringe of like Ulster or Connacht squads or Super Rugby Cymru and all of that in this part of the world. Same with the top 14, will have players playing Nationality who are like fringe top 14 players, you know.
Those still count towards your 30 games.
Yes.
Anything where you play... Now, the thing is...
I can see why it gets a little bit frustrating for one coach when, you know, the other team is the one that's responsible for that number. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And I don't know, like it's...
I guess the argument is, it's more important than... winning the game, isn't it?
Exactly.
Is the welfare of these players. And so you do kind of have to suck that up because the rules are the same for everybody.
Yeah.
The thing that isn't, I guess, the same for everybody is how many of these players they have that apply to them and how important those players are to each individual squad. You can have your captain at Nationality level is on the fringe of the Bordeaux squad or something like that and will play 3 or 4 games a season, has ambitions of being a full-time Bordeaux player.
Well, you mentioned the Welsh regions earlier, right? This will have a disproportionate knock-on on teams with small squads.
Yeah.
So that'll be teams like, you know, Newcastle over the last few years, like the Welsh regions, who have squads of 35 players.
Yeah.
And suddenly, if you have to rest them more, I think it's a really positive thing that will have knock-on effects. I don't mean this as like a negative, right? I think this is broadly incredibly positive.
Yeah.
I think this is a really good thing they've put in place. And I think it's good that there's a world like set limit, right? They're not in a situation where you've got some nations flogging their players and others not. And that leading to a complete split in how teams are managed, right? And so you get some teams burn out at the end of the season because they've had to play the same players every week. Yeah. You have some teams where it's kind of the opposite and everyone's being rested really well and they perform well at the end of the season, but they have dips in the middle of the year where you're not seeing the best players, but whatever. I think it's positive. But I think like more than anything, it's a really telling thing. This is really like Brett Robinson's first thing. It's like his baby and he's been very clear, like, I wanted this, I've been really pushing on this. You know, this was like the thing that he wanted to do was step in and put in place real guidelines on player load.
Yeah, that's really important. And again, going back to the concussion aspect of this, because micro concussions are a thing.
Yeah.
And those can add up and really take the toll on a player. Sometimes having as much as, let's say they have a week of no play and a week of non-contact training, that is 2 to 3 weeks you're looking at there, where there's not that much mental load or physical load going on that player's brain, you know, and that will make a world of difference. You look at, worldwide I say, but like, for instance, in England, the mandatory rest, if you've had a concussion, is 2 to 3 weeks. Yeah. Ideally, they say 21 days after the event is when you can have your return, and you can do non-contact training in the sort of 7 days prior to that building back up. And again, like I think it's really positive that they are implementing these in a mandatory way. Yeah. So when concussions don't get picked up, as we literally saw in the Lions tour, Gary Ringrose, he had a concussion that wasn't picked up by his mouth guard, wasn't picked up by the team doctor. It was picked up by himself. He realised, having experienced his concussion before, this is the same, I'm having the same symptoms here. I don't want to play on this weekend. It's not a good idea for me to play on this weekend. Those moments do happen. They will happen much less if after the weekend where this micro-concussion or a second micro-concussion happens, they then go, okay, now I'm going to have 2 weeks off from playing rugby. Yeah. Suddenly those symptoms will start to waver a little bit, in most cases. You can't speak for every case, but yeah.
The tricky thing is very specifically South Africa and a little bit Argentina, because the South African clubs play year-round.
Yeah.
That if you are a Springbok player, there is a game you can be playing in probably like 48 weeks out of 50.
Yeah.
Right? That you are going straight from, the USC starts in September, runs through until May. You've then probably got like 2 or 3 weeks before the first Junior International. You've got 2 or 3 weeks between those Junior Internationals and the Rugby Championship, maybe slightly more than that. And otherwise, you're playing. right? Rugby Championship has a couple of break weeks now. Next year it'll be the tour, so that'll be different. I wonder how those tour matches will play into it. They're playing potentially 2 games a week.
Yeah.
Lions tours likewise becomes a whole issue. And then you're going straight from there. Like literally, the Rugby Championship finishes week 2 of the URC. So like there are, probably like 5 or 6 weeks where there isn't a game on. And those are break weeks. Those aren't like an off season. So how are they going to make sure that a player like Eben Etzebeth, say, who will play every game he's available for, and is a hard nut player, wants to play every game he's available for, you're going to need to make, and this is the thing that is changing, right? He's now going to have, and I don't know how they're going to do it, but like he's probably going to have a 5-week stand down period after this Rugby Championship concludes. So he won't be available to play again until basically the autumn internationals.
The other thing about this as well is the URC South African teams are on tour almost half of their season.
Yeah.
And so they're having to bring players out. And sometimes you're having to fly a player out to the other side of the world and only play them once when you've got like a 4-week tour.
Critically, the stand down week off because of international duty does mention they want time off from travel as well.
Okay,
to spend some time,
again, that's good. I like that.
Yeah. But I think South Africa is like this real issue in here.
Argentina's an interesting one as well, isn't it?
Because most of the players play overseas. Right? Like 90% of their players are in European leagues, where they are thrown into nations where, like, traditionally a lot of the players have been absolutely flogged by
their national and club calendars do
French
not
teams
line up at all.
English teams, mostly. So that becomes a bit of an issue.
Luckily,
it will be interesting to see how strictly World Rugby oversee this, right? Because everyone had to sign up to it. Will they let in more of the little anomalies and little exceptions than they're claiming in this?
Potentially. It's probably a bit of a trial, isn't it? Luckily, with South Africa and Argentina, both of those have head coaches who are really hot on this and really like this kind of thing. Like, Rassie Erasmus has a huge squad. And granted, if he didn't have a huge squad, it maybe be a different story. And so maybe this isn't the point. He does rotate a lot. That his squad is rarely the same or even similar from one week to the next. He's very much horse for horses at this stage in his career kind of coach. Felipe Contepomi as well is somebody who's said publicly player welfare is like his number one priority as a coach. That he doesn't expect his squad to perform well if he doesn't look after the players as individuals. And I really like that. And, you know, like literally the week after beating the Lions, and that, you know, they've had the big, well, not the week after, but a couple of weeks after beating the Lions, they had the 2-test tour against England. 1 week that he goes full guns blazing, like everybody's out, and then they completely changed the squad the next week. And when he's asked about it, he goes, "Well, you know, everyone talks about player welfare. I would be a hypocrite if I played my best team. You know, for all these test matches in a row, we've got Rugby Championship around the corner. It's pointless. I'd rather blood some other players and get a bit of depth and see like the benefit of that way around, because there are more benefits to other than just player welfare to this in terms of giving people game time."
I wonder if Springbok internationals become even less valuable than they currently are. If you are a club team, do you want to sign someone that you need to stand down for 5 weeks after the Rugby Championship and then potentially goes away into another international block, then comes back? Potentially you're only getting this player between December and May.
Pollard at Leicester, you know, huge game player, is world class, but for the amount they were paying him, they didn't get him all year round.
Leicester Tigers are an interesting example because when Michael Cheika was there and previously Dan McKellar, they both had the same policy of they would give Montoya, Pollard, Jasper Wiese previously, their overseas, like players played in the Rugby Championship, they would get the Six Nations off.
Yeah.
And they wouldn't even call them in for the Premiership games in the break weeks. They would let them go on holiday for 5 weeks and then have that break to manage them. Yeah. And I imagine there's probably other clubs have done that similarly, just like I know for a fact Leicester were doing that, right?
Yeah.
I don't know. I think it's an interesting one. I think it's like a positive step of the direction World Rugby's going in.
Yeah.
I feel like we're going to get a lot more of this. I'm really intrigued by the fact that Brett Robinson is both pro 20-minute red cards and very much putting this in place.
Yeah.
But
they send out very different messages, those two.
They do. But I don't know. Like, if this is the first thing coming out of World Rugby over this 4 or 8 year cycle with him in charge, I feel like it's a positive first step, and I wonder if that's what it's going to be, right? We had 8 years of let's try and make the game full of as many values as possible. Now let's make the game as safe as possible.
Yeah, because the thing is, when Bill Beaumont picked up his rugby ball and ran with it at rugby school in 1821, like, nobody considered that this is like an aspect of this sport that it's going to be quite dangerous on people's brains. And by the time people had fallen in love with it and like made clubs about it and showed them who they were going to support about it and got invested in it and started paying to go to games for it, right? nobody had considered this by this point.
No one considered it in 1995 when the game went professional, right? How
Exactly.
much bigger players would get, how much more dangerous this would become. So, I don't know. The other big concussion news of the last few weeks, do you think they should implement this stand-down period for Tom Holland?
Why Tom Holland?
The Spider-Man. Yeah, he got a major concussion filming Spider-Man.
Oh, did he?
Yeah, so he's been stood down from filming for 2 weeks.
Oh.
Yeah.
That is a
shame. Do you think they should make him only do 30 weeks of filming a year?
Yeah, they should know what they should do. They should make him go and play for Bristol for a week.
Just see how he goes.
Get his 1,000 touches in and see how he goes.
I want to quickly, before we finish, right?
Yes.
I noticed this in the corner, and I want to read the beginning of the biography of Bill Beaumont from the autobiography of Bill Beaumont.
Hit me.
Bill Beaumont is unquestionably the most famous English rugby player of recent times. By example...
Recent? How long ago was this?
Actually, no, maybe this is another video. Maybe we finish here and we read Bill Beaumont's biography in another video.
Maybe we do. If there's demand, we can do that.